Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan. The Clone Wars wasn't just a conflict fought over state or planetary rights. It was more than a war about unfair taxation without representation. At the core of this conflict was a group of extremely powerful mega conglomerates and corporate nations and their desire to do what corporations do best: grow and expand. The name of these entities might be familiar to you: the Trade Federation, the Techno Union, Intergalactic Banking Clan. But what made these corporations so special compared to other factions that joined the Separatist Alliance or stayed with the Republic was the fact that they remained neutral, but somehow were able to service both sides of the battle lines. Today we're going to take a look at why these corporate entities were not kicked out of the Republic Senate despite the fact that they had clear connections to the Separatist Alliance. If you study politics in a free market democratic republic like the Galactic Republic or the United States, you notice that at the core of every major issue being discussed today, there is an underlying economic cause to that problem. Whether it's social injustice, immigration issues, dysfunction in the healthcare or education system, these are all symptoms of usually economic dysfunction. The Separatist crisis in the Clone Wars is no different. At the surface level, we are fooled into believing that the war was started because the Outer Rim planets were frustrated with their lack of representation in the Senate and a complete lack of services provided by the Republic, mainly security and basic infrastructure. But the reality was that throughout the entire history of the Republic, the Outer Rim colonies were always being blocked from gaining representation by the powerful political factions in the core region that controlled the Senate. And as far as security in the Outer Rim goes, the Republic hadn't had a federal military for 1,000 years. And even when there was a federal military, the Republic basically ignored the Outer Rim, even when it was under attack by other factions. The old Republic military at the time would only mobilize when more populated core worlds were under threat, as seen during the early years of the Mandalorian Crusades. Despite all this, the Outer Rim citizens never decided to rebel like they did during the Clone Wars. As a matter of fact, they kind of understood that there was a lack of population and a lack of wealth in those areas for true economic development and a creation of some kind of Outer Rim security force. And so the type of people who moved to the Outer Rim did so voluntarily. They were either individuals running away for something or looking for an undeveloped territory where freedom, opportunity, and land was plentiful. It was really Darth Plagueis and his lobbying group, Damask Holdings, who ultimately united a bunch of dissenters in the Outer Rim and organized them into a political movement. But this was an operation that took many decades to complete, and it was brilliant. At the center of this entire plot were several corporate entities who operated in what was known as the Free Trade Zone. Established by the Galactic Senate in 124 BB1, the plan was to jumpstart economic development in the Outer Rim. Now, the federal government neither had the political will or funds to do this themselves, so what they focused on was attracting businesses with a lot of capital to the area by basically getting rid of any tariffs and regulation on trade in the entire Outer Rim. The Outer Rim basically became the Wild West for mega conglomerates and corporations. And as we could tell from our own history here on Earth, any form of extreme political or economic system usually creates a lot of issues and disparity for the average person. While capital did indeed flood into the Outer Rim for economic development, we also saw several corporate entities essentially set up personal fiefdoms and exploit the local resources and manpower for their own purposes, and at the same time establish a monopoly over basic goods and services. Organizations like the Trade Federation soon secured all of the hyperspace lanes with their security forces, but also began price-fixing basic commodities. The intergalactic banking clans controlled the financing for business development in the area and gave companies predatory loans, which it enforced through its own private military. The Techno Union, thanks to the cheap cost of doing business in the Outer Rim and the bountiful resources that could be found out there, quickly started undercutting core world manufacturers, which led to a shift in manufacturing from the core to the Outer Rim. Things were quickly growing out of control, and soon these corporations became way too large to dismantle because they were becoming essential infrastructure. Although these corporate fiefdoms were established far away from the core region, soon they used their money to buy and lobby for influence in the Galactic Republic Senate, such as the weakness of an open democracy. Eventually, the Galactic Republic started catching on. In 67 BBY, they launched a series of antitrust lawsuits against these corporations, but it was already too late. This was partly due to the fact that the core-reaching corporations were beginning to find it hard to compete with the lower-priced goods and services from the Outer Rim. In exchange for breaking apart several different mega-conglomerates and opening the Outer Rim to more competition from local and planetary companies, several corporate entities were actually granted positions in the Galactic Senate and treated as member states. The corporations finally had achieved what they wanted all along, which was legitimacy and a permanent position in the Senate. By 33 BBY, the Senate finally passed BR 0371, which basically dissolved the Free Trade Zone. This really pissed off a lot of corporations and led to the Trade Federation blockade of Naboo. It is important to notice that during this completely illegal action, the Republic really limits their intervention to basically none. The only Republic presence on the planet were 2 Jedi diplomats who were attacked illegally by Trade Federation droids under the command of Nute Gunray. The Jedi didn't technically participate in any larger battles during the conflict and focused on protecting the monarch of the planet and eliminating a Sith agent, which actually falls within their operation parameters. Most of the fighting against the Separatist blockade was carried out by a Gungan Naboo alliance. It was important that the Republic minimize their involvement because an intervention against a corporate blockade seeking out loans from a debtor planet would firmly put the Republic against these corporate interests in the galaxy and the Senate. This would set a precedent that would further enrage the corporate members of the Senate who were already really pissed off with the dissolution of the Free Trade Zone. Fear was more corporations would carry out their own protests similar to the blockade of Naboo and create more unrest. Also, now that the Trade Federation and several corporate entities had representation in the Senate, they were able to successfully block Queen Padme Amidala's request for Republic intervention to stop the Naboo blockade. This fear of corporations in the Galactic Republic also led to a very light punishment for the Trade Federation following the blockade. They were basically sanctioned, and they did lose some control over the trade monopolies they had in the Outer Rim. Only Nute Gunray, the viceroy of the Trade Federation, was arrested and put on trial. For 4 years, this heavily publicized trial went on, but luckily Nute Gunray had an elite team of lawyers who got him off of all of the charges. He was able to maintain control over all of his former assets and even his position within the Trade Federation. A decade later, the Trade Federation, along with the corporate alliance Techno Union, Intergalactic Banking Clan, all secretly pledged support to Count Dooku and the newly founded Confederacy of Independent Systems. Well, it was supposed to be secret, and they would have gotten away with it were it not for that pesky Jedi Obi-Wan Kenobi who overheard their meeting and quickly contacted the Jedi Order with that information. It was obvious that the droids being used during the Battle of Geonosis were just repurposed Trade Federation droids used during the Battle of Naboo. Most people in the galaxy probably could connect the dots themselves that the Trade Federation was involved with the CIS. It wasn't a secret, but yet no one really discussed it in the Senate, which is kind of sad. Now, officially, Nute Gunray was labeled a criminal after it was uncovered that he tried to hire an assassin to kill Padme Amidala. He had a terrible grudge against her ever since the whole Naboo fiasco. The Trade Federation smartly decided to distance themselves away from Nute Gunray and declared him an extremist who no longer was a part of the Trade Federation. This again was just widely accepted. Of course, Palpatine did support this notion as well, and he had a considerable amount of influence in the Senate that he had gathered from the days when he was Naboo's representative. Another major reason why this was accepted was because many in the Republic establishment were terrified that if they pushed the Trade Federation too far, they would publicly join the Separatist Alliance, significantly weakening the Republic's image, which was already quite damaged at the time. Simply put, the Republic looked foolish and inept and unprepared. It had not foreseen the emergence of the CIS's massive army, and its own clone army was completely outnumbered, and worlds were being overrun by droid armies or leaving the Republic voluntarily. There was a fear that if the Trade Federation left, it would create a domino effect of other corporate entities leaving the Republic. Especially corporate factions who were aligned with the Trade Federation and generally voted as a bloc in the Senate. Then there was the Techno Union, perhaps the largest commerce guild in the entire galaxy. It also claimed neutrality, despite the fact that its leader, Wat Tambor, was spotted also pledging allegiance directly to Count Dooku, and then was later captured during the illegal Separatist invasion of Ryloth, which he was in charge of. I mean, it doesn't get any more embarrassing than that for a faction claiming to be neutral, right? Well, it gets worse. Two of the Techno Union subsidiaries were Bactoid Armor Workshop and Bactoid Combat Automata. They were essentially the ones that built most of the ground forces and armored vehicles and weapons for the Separatist droid army. They were clearly arming the enemies of the Republic, and it was their droid foundries that the JR had found on Geonosis after defeating the Separatists in the opening battle of the war. They were clearly helping the Separatists in several different ways, but of course it's never that simple. Amongst the other holdings the Techno Union had were Blast Tech Industries, which produced the DC line of blaster rifles, which were the main small arms used by the Grand Army of the Republic. Then there was Quad Drive Yards, which was another subsidiary of the Techno Union. Their shipyards, along with their subsidiary Rothana Heavy Engineering, were in charge of the construction of all the Republic's capital ships, including the Venator-class Star Destroyer, the Acclamator-class assault ship, along with the JAR's main ground assault vehicle, the ATTE. Lastly, the Techno Union also was in charge of Republic Senior Systems, which was later turned into Senior Fleet Systems, which created the TIE Fighter line. They are also known for building the Chancellor's private luxury yachts. Basically, Wattenbor openly defied the Techno Union's neutrality and did whatever he wanted because the Republic wouldn't be able to arm any of their soldiers or operate any ship larger than a Corellian corvette without the Techno Union. The third part of this corporate trifecta was the Intergalactic Banking Clan. They also remained neutral during the Clone Wars and was the major lender for most of the galaxy. Not only did the IGBC give Republic worlds a heightened interest rate during the Clone Wars, they actively supplied their droids to the Separatist military. The reality was that the IGBC held so much interest in so many different companies and worlds in the galaxy that any kind of sanction against them would lead to a major economic depression and could lead to the downfall of the Republic very quickly. It was another organization that was deemed essential and too big to fight against. Of course, towards the end of the war, as Palpatine gathered more power into the executive position, he would nationalize the IGBC, creating a Federal Reserve which allowed him to print credits in order to continue the expansion of his massive military. Palpatine would also nationalize the assets of the Trade Federation and Techno Union and all of its subsidiaries in the years following the rise of the Empire. Ultimately, he had been in control of every major player in the Clone Wars and therefore could pull the strings behind the scene and perfectly execute his takeover. I'm a huge supporter of the free market. I think it's the most efficient and natural economic system for a human society. At the same time, I also believe in some regulation that can prevent corporations from completely infiltrating and taking over the legislation process or the federal government. I also think it's not a good idea to have corporations monopolizing basic infrastructure and services and also gaining so much capital that they can basically push the federal government in any direction they want to. At the end of the day, a good, healthy democracy needs balance, and you lose balance when one side gains way too much control, which is exactly what happens in the Clone Wars. You have corporate entities who are essentially war profiteering from both sides of a conflict and still not being punished for it. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. And as usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.